In November 1917, a British politician wrote a letter. It took him less than an hour. It was 67 words long. He was promising land he had never visited, to a people he had never consulted, on behalf of a government that had already promised that same land to someone else. That letter has no official legal standing. It was never ratified by any parliament. It was addressed not to a government, but to a private citizen. And yet, every war, every negotiation, every headline you have read about Gaza, about the West Bank, about Israel and Palestine, every single one of them traces a direct line back to those 67 words written on a Tuesday morning in London. Most people have never heard of it. Today, you will. To understand what this letter meant, you need to understand the world it was born into. It is November 1917. The First World War has been running for 3 years. 1 million French soldiers have died in a single year of trench warfare. The Western Front has moved less than 10 miles. Europe is exhausted, broke, and desperate. In Russia, something extraordinary is happening. The Bolshevik Revolution is succeeding. The Tsar has fallen. A communist government is about to pull Russia out of the war entirely. And Britain is terrified of what that means for the Eastern Front. In the Ottoman Empire, which controls Palestine, the sick man of Europe is finally dying. British forces are advancing through the Middle East. Jerusalem will fall to British troops in just 6 weeks. The Ottoman Empire's 4 centuries of rule over Palestine are ending. And in the United States, which has only just entered the war, Britain desperately needs continued American Jewish support to keep the loans and the public opinion flowing. This is the world in which Arthur Balfour sits down to write his letter. Every word he writes is shaped by these pressures, and none of them have anything to do with the people already living in Palestine. Who was Balfour? Arthur James. Balfour was 69 years old in 1917, a Scottish aristocrat, a former prime minister, a man of extraordinary intelligence and almost complete indifference to the practical consequences of ideas. He had said publicly on record that he had no particular desire to be kind to Jews, and in the same breath argued that a Jewish homeland in Palestine would solve what he called the Jewish problem in Europe. The anti-Semitism and the support for Zionism were not contradictions in his mind. They were the same idea. The letter itself. On November 2nd, 1917, Balfour wrote a letter to Walter Rothschild, a prominent figure in the British Jewish community. It read, in its entirety, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. 67 words. Read them carefully. Notice what it says, a national home, not a state. The word state appears nowhere. Notice who it protects, the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities, not their political rights, not their right to self-determination, not even their right to be named. The Arabs, who made up 90% of Palestine's population at the time, are referred to only as non-Jewish communities. They are defined entirely by what they are not. This was not an accident. Earlier drafts of the letter had stronger protections for the Arab population. Those protections were removed deliberately in negotiations between British officials and Zionist leaders over the preceding months. The contradiction nobody talks about here is what makes this letter genuinely extraordinary, and what almost no one teaches. At the exact same time, Britain was writing the Balfour Declaration, promising a Jewish homeland in Palestine. British officials were also writing letters to Arab leaders promising them an independent Arab state that would include Palestine. The Hussein-McMahon Correspondence, a series of letters between 1915 and 1916, in which Britain explicitly encouraged the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire with the promise of Arab independence. Two promises: same land, same government, same year. When Arab leaders later confronted British officials with this contradiction, the response was essentially, the promises to the Arabs were vague enough to be deniable. The Balfour Declaration was public and specific enough to be binding. Britain had written 2 checks on the same account, and it would be the people of Palestine who paid when both of them bounced. Why did Britain do this? The honest answer is that Britain did not primarily do this out of sympathy for Jewish suffering, though that was part of the public justification. Britain did it because it was losing the war and needed things. It needed American Jewish support to maintain the flow of U.S. money and public opinion. It needed to outmaneuver France, which had its own ambitions in the Middle East under the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement signed just a year earlier. And it needed to establish a British-friendly foothold in Palestine before the war ended and the carve-up of the Ottoman Empire began. A Jewish homeland under British protection would give Britain a permanent strategic presence in a region it desperately wanted to control. Balfour himself later wrote, with remarkable candor, that the Zionist project was rooted in present needs and future hopes of far greater importance than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land. He wrote that, in private, and then signed the letter, tracing the line to today. For 30 years, the Balfour Declaration sat largely in the background, while Jewish immigration to Palestine steadily increased under British administration. Arab protests were suppressed. Jewish communities grew. Tension built. Then, in 1947, an exhausted Britain handed the problem to the newly formed United Nations. The UN proposed a partition plan, splitting Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Jewish leaders accepted. Arab leaders rejected. And in May 1948, the State of Israel declared independence. Within 24 hours, 5 Arab armies had invaded. The war that followed, the First Arab-Israeli War, displaced 700,000 Palestinians. They fled or were expelled from their homes. In Arabic, this event is called the Nakba, the catastrophe. Their descendants, now numbering more than 5 million, are still officially classified as refugees today, the longest-running refugee crisis in modern history. Every war since, every failed peace negotiation, Camp David, Oslo, the Gaza disengagement, October 7th, 2023, the bombardment that followed. Every headline you have read this year about the Middle East, all of it has a straight line back to a letter written in an hour, in an office in London in November 1917. A letter that promised land its author had no right to promise, to people he had never met, without consulting the people who already lived there. The analytical conclusion. Here is what the Balfour Declaration actually teaches us. Not about Jews or Arabs or Britain specifically, but about how power works. When empires are desperate, they make promises they cannot keep to people who cannot enforce them, about things that do not belong to them. Britain needed something in 1917. A letter was cheap. The consequences were not, but they would be paid by people who were never in the room when the letter was written. That pattern, powerful people deciding the fate of absent people, did not begin in 1917. It did not end there either. It is the defining mechanism of modern geopolitics. It is how borders get drawn, how populations get displaced, how conflicts that look ancient are actually quite young. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not a religious war that has lasted for thousands of years, as it is so often described. It is a political conflict, barely 100 years old, created by specific decisions made by specific people for specific reasons that had very little to do with the people whose lives those decisions would define. Knowing that doesn't make the conflict simpler, but it does make it honest. And honest is where understanding begins. A 67-word letter, written in under an hour, by a man who had never been to the place he was promising. That is the origin story of one of the most intractable conflicts in modern history. If this is the kind of history you want to understand, not just what happened, but why, and who decided, and who paid, this channel is where we do that. The next video goes deeper into the same period. The secret agreement that was made the year before Balfour wrote his letter, and which directly contradicted everything in it. I'll see you there